What's going on? This Theo Gremminger, aka the OG Fantasy, back at it again. The 2-minute drill. These are my biggest fantasy takeaways from week 10. We're already here in week 11. It's just wild. This past week was one where, there wasn't a whole lot of excitement. There was not too many games with teams with winning records facing off against one another. We started the week off with kind of like a unexciting Thursday night game. We ended the week with kind of an unexciting Sunday night game. I'm hoping that we get an explosive, huge Josh Allen game to end on Monday Night Football tonight. But we're chugging along. We're grinding out wins. We're doing the best that we can every single week. We're trying to identify the edges that we can to help us win fantasy matchups. And that's kind of what this last week was. There was some really big fantasy performances. There were some fantasy disappointments, and there was a ton of action. There were some players where we continue to get really excited about them. Then there's some players who have some disappointing performances. This week is another week where we only had 4 teams on bye, but it was a very impactful one. I mean, you had teams like Miami, Philadelphia, and Kansas City, as well as the Los Angeles Rams with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp unavailable to you. So hopefully you stuck with us here at Player Profiler. Hopefully you saw my sleepers video this past week, which actually went really, really well. I had Devin Singletary. We had Noah Brown in there. We had a bunch of guys who actually did very, very well. Recommended picking up Ty Chandler. It looks like he's going to get a spot start at least this week. We recommended Rico Dowdle. So that one went really, really well. But stick with us here at Player Profiler all week long. We got some really fun shows, planned. We've got some very good videos. I'm dropping my waiver video tomorrow. But we really got to review this past week first. And these are a couple things that really stood out to me in terms of fantasy. My first takeaway, Carolina, we have issues. Bryce Young and the Panthers, they dropped to 1-8. And this was an ugly loss, 16-13 to Chicago. Really hard to get through this game. A hat tip to all of us who play fantasy football. Maybe some of you out there who like to gamble. But if you're not a fantasy football player or a gambler, this was a hard one to watch for just kind of like the love of the game. But, we've seen all this immediate success for CJ Stroud in Houston, and that sort of made Bryce Young's season even worse. It's been a disappointing year for him. It's been a very disappointing year for Frank Reich. Doesn't seem like the fit is going to last very long for him there. But this week was a really hard one to take for Carolina Panthers fans and for fantasy managers, especially dynasty managers who selected Bryce Young. Young gets matched up against another rookie. There was some goodwill in the sense that he beat CJ Stroud. Way too much made into that game. That was like, I had people tweeting at me about how like my takes on CJ Stroud being so much better than Bryce Young were wrong because, hey, Theo, look who won the game. Listen, I don't play real football. I play fantasy football. And CJ Stroud is 1,000% better than Bryce Young and in real football as well. So keep adding me. You guys, the pro Bryce Young people, keep coming at me. I'll take CJ Stroud all day long, and I'm going to come out on top with that one. But this past week was not CJ Stroud, and it wasn't going up against a guy like Will Levis or, had he been healthy, Anthony Richardson. You had Bryce Young going up against another rookie quarterback, and this time he went up against an undrafted free agent, Tyson Bagent. One played at Alabama, one played at Shepherd, and there wasn't a huge difference if you're watching those guys. Like, Bagent comes out on top, the winner. Chicago wins the game. Deonta Foreman was good, but Bryce Young is not doing anything to elevate the Carolina Panthers. They don't have personnel around him that helps him out. There are issues in Carolina, and Carolina is going to struggle to win games for the rest of the season. And that first-round pick belongs to the Chicago Bears. A lot of problems over there. We got an early morning European game. Again, this is the last one. Hat tip to my friend Billy Muzio, who I co-host First Class Fantasy with. Billy lives in Oregon. I live on Long Island, New York. I love the early morning Sunday game. I think it's awesome. Billy has to watch it at 6:30. Does not enjoy it as much as I do, to say the least. So hat tip to my friends on the West Coast. You guys don't have to wake up early anymore, but it was a fun run of European games. This one was very forgettable. The Colts win 10-6. If you're a fan in Germany, and drop the bag to go to the game in Frankfurt, you're probably very disappointed in your purchase. It looked like the fans were having fun, but the game was a 10-6 game. It was like watching paint drying. My guy Demario Douglas had a solid performance. Michael Pittman did some great things. Pittman's playing great this season. And why wasn't that near touchdown reviewed early in the game? That one was like very tilting for me as a Pittman manager, that it looked like he got the touchdown and there was no challenge. Very odd. But the takeaway fantasy-wise is Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor's usage should have fantasy managers very excited about the rest of the season. This was a neutral game script, a tight game the entire way, and Jonathan Taylor carries the ball 23 times. Season high for him in carries. The first time he goes over the 20 carry mark all year long. The efficiency was not great. He only had 69 rushing yards, but he saved his fantasy day with a touchdown score. The Colts are 5-5. This is what the offense is. Josh Downs is banged up. It's a lot of Michael Pittman. That's the passing game until Josh Downs comes back, and a ton of Jonathan Taylor. The early fears of like Zach Moss cutting into his usage, those are gone. Zach Moss is strictly a handcuff, and a very good handcuff who's had fantasy success. But Jonathan Taylor is here to stay. I think you're going to see a number of 20 carry games the rest of the way. This is the Colts' identity. They can sneak into the AFC playoffs. And speaking of AFC South teams, CJ Stroud is just magical. CJ Stroud is such a great player. This is not a Dynasty takeaway show, but CJ Stroud at this point, it's hard not to make an argument that he's like a top 5 Dynasty quarterback. The game comes so easily to him. He is so developed mentally, such a poised player. And then you add that to his exceptional arm talent. He can make all of the throws. There's like very difficult to kind of pick holes in CJ Stroud's game. But the Texans led Cincinnati 27-17, less than 4 minutes to go. This was like a statement win for Houston to go onto the road into the state of Ohio against a team that's been so successful the last few seasons in terms of making the AFC playoffs, going deep. And the Houston Texans controlled the game, up 27-17. The Bengals rallied to tie it at 27. So CJ Stroud gets the ball back with 1:33 on the clock. And it's like surgery with this guy. Leads them right down the field. And they have a game-winning field goal from Matt Amendola. Bang, bang, bang. And you expected it. That's how good CJ Stroud is he gets an opportunity for the win now, and with like 1.5 minutes on the clock, I'm expecting him to win. That's kind of how we treat these high-end, exceptional quarterbacks in the NFL. That's the mark of a star quarterback, let alone a fantasy star. And he's elevating players around him. He was missing Nico Collins this game. Noah Brown has a career-high 172 receiving yards. Dalton Schultz has another solid game with 70 receiving yards. And then Tank Dell continues his fantastic rookie year with another touchdown grab. So, it doesn't matter who's around CJ Stroud. You talk about, from game one to this game, game one, the top running back was Dameon Pierce and the top wide receiver, Nico Collins. Both those players missing. Stroud has had offensive line issues to deal with this year, and he just keeps on playing great. The AFC South is Houston's for the taking. And before we get off of the Texans here, we got to talk about Devin Singletary. We talked about Devin Singletary a ton in my waiver wire column. I was more bullish on him, and I'm not here to pat my own back, but we had him very high up in our waiver wire rankings for several weeks. Even through the bye week, we had him high in our waiver wire rankings because to me, this was just I didn't expect what we had this Sunday, but I did expect him to kind of overtake Dameon Pierce once we saw him reaching like a 50-50 split. So he gets to a 50-50 split level with Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce was very inefficient this season. Then Pierce gets hurt. Devin Singletary takes his opportunity and he runs with it. Last week, extremely disappointing outcome, though. He has 23 total yards last week in a 39-37 win over Tampa. But D'Amico Ryans praised Singletary this week, said he had a couple of tough runs. So, like, you could have read it different ways. Like, he was trying to build up a veteran, showing that they have confidence in him, especially without Pierce. And most people like roll their eyes at it and are like, whatever. The guy had 23 yards, but he had 15 carries, and then he gets the 23 yards. So I had Devin Singletary in my Sleepers article and Sleepers video. Definitely check that one out. It drops Thursday or Friday right here. But Singletary this week ends up going insane. And out of nowhere, 150 rushing yards. This is a career high for Singletary, and he gets a touchdown run. Singletary, this is wild. Singletary finishes with the most rushing yards by a Houston Texan since Carlos Hyde in 2019. I don't know what it is about the Houston Texans. They get like these random dudes to have like big time rushing yards. I remember it was Rex Burkhead about 2 years ago, had 1 week where he went for 140 plus, but he didn't hit 150. That's Devin Singletary. And I think it would be a shock at this point if Dameon Pierce comes back and overtakes Singletary. You ride out Singletary here. Singletary is not going to have 150 yards probably ever again, but he is going to be a guy that you can consider a low-end RB2 or a high-end RB3. He's a flex play for you. If he's on your roster, be happy you have him. It's another way to get access to this Houston Texans offense, who has scored 39 and 30 points in back-to-back weeks. We want Houston Texans in our lineup. I think one more reason I have such optimism for the Houston Texans winning their division is the big disappointment we saw yesterday from Jacksonville. And Jacksonville had taken like some very big steps forward as an organization. We had seen like really, really great progress made. It's been a weird season. They start the season off, they lose to Kansas City and Houston at home. Then they go to England and they win 2 games in a row. They have the big win over the Bills. Then on Sunday, it was kind of like the marquee game of the week, just because there wasn't too many other games on the schedule. But you had the 49ers going into Jacksonville, and this was like a game where Jacksonville had an opportunity for like a big home win, and instead they get completely woodshedded. San Francisco beats them 34-3, and it was a decent game at the end of the first half. And then the second half starts out and George Kittle rips off a 60-plus yard touchdown, and that's it. And the 49ers displayed offensive balance. They played mistake-free football, 0 turnovers. Again, Kittle finishes the game with 100 receiving yards, has 4 catches, for over 100 receiving yards for the second consecutive week. He finishes with 4 catches for 113 yards and that 66-yard touchdown. Deebo Samuel scores a rushing touchdown. Brandon Ayuk catches a touchdown. And then Christian McCaffrey's historical touchdown streak ends, but he finished with 142 combined yards. Brock Purdy, flawless. 3 touchdown passes, 296 passing yards. The 49ers have such offensive balance. They're a scary team moving forward. For them to put this sort of performance coming off of a bye week is telling. Jacksonville, on the other hand, a big disappointment. We'll look for them to bounce back. Very disappointing game if you played Trevor Lawrence. Very disappointing game if you played Travis Etienne. Etienne will be fine. He's been so good. Christian Kirk delivered. That's been a positive all season long for Jacksonville. Even Evan Engram, disappointment. So Jacksonville will look to see them get back on track, but, really, really kind of like an eye-opening game, just a complete stark difference between the quality of these teams. Another team who's been very surprising this year and sort of doing it with smoke and mirrors is the Pittsburgh Steelers. This past game, they improved to 6-3 on the season. They beat Green Bay, and the story really was their running backs. Jalen Warren and Najee Harris both delivered. Pittsburgh's improves to 6-3. The running back duo combines for 149 rushing yards in Week 9 against Tennessee. And then this week, they were even better. They both score touchdowns. They combined for 183 yards. The passing game, non-existent. Kenny Pickett is not very good, to say the least. This is not going to be an anti Kenny Pickett game. I think the fact that Pittsburgh is winning with Kenny Pickett at quarterback really says a lot about the quality of the program that Mike Tomlin has there. Tomlin continually does more with less than most NFL coaches. They have a pretty simple formula. They have limitations at quarterback, but they have a consolidated target tree where you're going to see Deontay Johnson have some games. George Pickens led them in receiving, but just was kind of unplayable. But really, it's the running game. We've wanted a lot more Jaylen Warren. We're starting to see it. Najee Harris is playing well, though. So I think both of these guys can get treated as low-end RB2s and be happy with it. Both of them have been extremely efficient. Both of them are playing very well. Warren has a little bit more juice, but I'm a Warren guy over Harris, but I have to give my props to Najee Harris. The guy played very, very well. He's been very productive for fantasy. And this Pittsburgh team, this is the formula. So we don't like starting two running backs from the same team. Certainly we would not want to do that in the same fantasy lineup. But if you have either Harris or Warren, just don't worry about it. Start them both the rest of the way. It's probably more exciting to you if you're a Jaylen Warren fantasy manager because you drafted him a lot later than you got Najee Harris. But if you did draft Najee Harris, it's starting to pay off. And if you drafted Warren, you've got to feel really good about things because he's afforded you the opportunity to be strong at wide receiver potentially. And you got to feel pretty confident that you know what the Steelers are. And I think having peace of mind that you know what an offense is the rest of the way, there's something about that. Don't play that Pickett guy, play the running backs. And another guy that's going to be locked into your fantasy lineup, as he has all season, is Mike Evans. And Mike Evans is going to get the bag this offseason. Someone is going to pay Mike Evans a fortune. He's an older player. This is a guy that's not going to be in the league for a ton of more years, but he is aging gracefully. The guy has playing some of the best football he has played in years. If you're Mike Evans' agent, you're loving every bit of this season. He tied a season high with 10 targets and ends up with 6 catches for 143 yards and a touchdown. He now has 7 touchdown catches on the season, 737 receiving yards. It's like clockwork with him. He is going to have another season with 1,000+ receiving yards. And I wish I drafted a lot more Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield combinations in best ball because out of nowhere, this has been such a great connection. In the preseason, Chris Godwin was almost like a unanimous. If you were asking fantasy analysts who they preferred between Chris Godwin and Mike Evans this preseason, literally everybody was on the Godwin side. Every single person who came on First Class Fantasy, including Billy Muzio and myself, were on the Chris Godwin side. I had a couple of takes this summer and a couple articles where I viewed Mike Evans as a potential bargain, but really that was at ADP. I didn't expect this. This is wild. Mike Evans is playing great. He's locked into your fantasy lineup. He's getting targeted at a high level. He is a touchdown threat. Baker Mayfield loves him. If you're in a trading league, kick the tires on Mike Evans. And if I'm in a dynasty league, I think Mike Evans has a little bit more dynasty value than some managers might realize because he is going to get paid this offseason. And Mike Evans could end up in a great situation for him. You look at a team like the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs. You can go down the line and find a number of these teams who are contending teams with big-time quarterbacks who could look at a guy like Mike Evans and say, that's the piece to push me over the edge. So go get yourself some Mike Evans if you can. But if you can't go get him and you have him on your fantasy team already, just enjoy the run. This is awesome. You crushed it. You made a great draft pick with Mike Evans. And another Tampa Bay Buck we've got to talk about is Rashad White. Rashad White is heading towards an RB1 season. And it's been a guy that people have loved to poke holes at his game. They'll say he's an inefficient rusher. They'll say that he's not that talented. Last year, the whole argument was, yeah, he had 50 catches as a rookie, which is really, really hard to do for a rookie running back. He gets 50 catches, but yeah, Tom Brady was his quarterback, so it doesn't count because that whole offense was about checking down to the running back. So, like Rashad White, during the offseason, we had him pretty high at Player Profiler in our rankings in Dynasty and in redraft, and the whole narrative was, they're going to draft a running back. They're going to go out and get Bijan. They're going to get Jahmyr Gibbs, Zach Charbonnet, and that's it. Don't worry about this Rashad White guy. He's a sell. Then he avoids any running back in the draft. Then the narrative becomes, oh, Rashad White, stay away from him. The Bucs are going to sign some running back in free agency. You don't want to draft Rashad White in these like early best balls. Like his ADP will go down. They're going to sign somebody. And then the summer moves along and all these running backs start signing places and they're like, no, they're still going to sign somebody. I mean, the haters for Rashad White were just coming out of the woodwork. Then the narrative becomes, oh, he's going to lose his job to Sean Tucker. Sean Tucker's an undrafted free agent, but he's so good, he's going to take Rashad White's job. Then that doesn't happen. Then the narrative becomes, oh, he's going to be in a split with Keyshawn Vaughn because there was like one game where they had a kind of near split. Then the recent narrative has been Chase Edmonds is going to come back and take away Rashad White's targets. None of these things come true. This coaching staff loves Rashad White. He has had consecutive games with 20 carries or more, and he scored this past week again on a receiving touchdown. Last week, he gave you over 27 PPR points. So Rashad White is not a perfect player, but he's headed towards a borderline RB1 season. Don't overthink it. Rashad White is definitely benefiting from like a situation and definitely benefiting from volume, but those fantasy points still count. Rashad White, we were correct on this past offseason. Again, if you drafted him in like the 6th round, 7th round, you've got to be feeling really, really good about your selection of Rashad White. And if you're a dynasty manager who did not sell low this offseason and you held on to him, there was a lot of fear and panic in dynasty on Rashad White. So if you held on to him, hat tip to you as well. Another running back we got to talk about here, it's wild. It's Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell has played 2 games as a pro. He has 14 touches, and he has 200 total yards. He is so explosive. He is one of the fastest running backs in the entire NFL. The problem is he's not getting the snaps. But this week, he scores again. He has a 39-yard touchdown run in the first quarter. And then later on, he adds a 32-yard reception. He gets outproduced by Gus Edwards. Or excuse me, he outproduces Gus Edwards and Justice Hill combined. But again, Gus Edwards leads the Ravens running backs in snaps. And then Justice Hill outsnaps Keaton Mitchell 14-13. That's somewhat of a positive that they're about even because Mitchell is so much better right now. It's not even close. He's been an incredible on per touch player. It's just hard to put a player, even one this productive, into your starting lineup. I think that in a perfect world, if you have Keaton Mitchell on your roster, you're just going to be patient with him. And you want to see it first. You want to see like him take away the volume. But a lot of us cannot afford to be patient. So I think you look at him like this. If you want to have a high ceiling type flex play this week, just start him. Put him in your lineup against the Bengals. If you're a huge favorite and you just need somebody to get like 10 points and you want to be like extra safe, you don't need to take the risk. But if I'm Harbaugh, how could I not give Keaton Mitchell more volume? I mean, all the guy is doing is just ripping off insane long runs. I think there could be some internal belief that he cannot handle the volume because he's small and he's fast and we just want to use him in certain gimmick situations and manufactured runs. I think that could be the case. But at the end of the day, this Ravens team is trying to win a Super Bowl. They're coming off of a loss. I need to do a little bit of self-scouting and say, hey, in the first half, this guy ran for a 39-yard touchdown. how can I not give him extra opportunities this week against Cincinnati in a must-win Thursday night game? So we had Keaton Mitchell as our number one waiver wire ad last week. Now he's rostered everywhere. Hopefully you have some Mitchell exposure because he's one of the most exciting players at the running back position right now, albeit one who's doing it with very minimal volume. But this dude, like, I know we talked about him being a sub 4.35 40. When you watch him play, he looks like he's running a 4.25. Like, the tape doesn't lie. He looks so fast. It's wild. So we're big on Keaton Mitchell right now at Player Profiler. Another player who went nuts this weekend was TJ Hawkinson. So Josh Dobbs has been like the tight end whisperer this year. You saw Zach Ertz have early tight end production. Then you saw Trey McBride have his like big ascent. Trey McBride, what a week, what a player. He's in your lineup too. But TJ Hawkinson ends up posting season highs in Minnesota's win against New Orleans. Hawkinson has season highs in targets with 15 and yardage with 134, and he ties a season high with 11 catches. He also catches a touchdown. And what's crazy is there were reports all week about how TJ Hawkinson may not go, how, he's banged up, and the beat reporters just, let us down once again. That's a whole podcast or show for the offseason, is how many times these beat writers kind of lead people down the wrong path. But TJ Hawkinson with Josh Dobbs in town, he's a top 3 tight end rest of the season. Nothing to even think about. And we got to talk about Josh Dobbs. It's just incredible what Dobbs is doing. He last week makes his debut. It was like a movie. Jaren Hall gets knocked out of the game. Dobbs gets to come onto the field maybe a lot earlier than Minnesota wanted from him. And the guy goes out, wins the game, puts up big fantasy numbers. This week, it's his first start, and he ends up doing it again. Minnesota was like dominating this game, and New Orleans made a big comeback, but like Dobbs had them rolling early on. He finishes with 268 passing yards and a touchdown, and then he adds 44 rushing yards and a touchdown. And his mobility brings a new element to this Minnesota offense that was already pretty scary. So last week, Dobbs finished as the quarterback 4 on the week. He's going to finish as a top 5 quarterback again this week. Like, Josh Dobbs is a locked-in QB1 until we see otherwise. Like, you have to remember, Justin Jefferson is coming back to this offense. So Dobbs is going to have unbelievable weapons in the passing game to go along with his rushing ability and a solid offensive line play from Minnesota. And the fact that Alexander Mattison is going to be missing this week with a concussion, I think there'll be even more rushing opportunities for Dobbs. And what'll be interesting to watch is, does Josh Dobbs just hold on to this job next season? Because Kirk Cousins is coming off of a big injury. The Vikings could move on from Kirk Cousins, who has a lot of value in the trade market. You got to think of a lot of teams who need a quarterback could look and who are going to get boxed out in the NFL draft. A team like the New York Jets could look at Kirk Cousins and say, hey, Kirk Cousins is the one who brings me to the playoffs. And Minnesota could end up with a cheaper option in Dobbs, and he could end up just being their quarterback for the next few seasons. It's wild to think, but Josh Dobbs has had a very successful season, and I think his best football is yet to come. Another player we got to talk about is Chris Olave. What a weird game. So Chris Olave finishes with 6 catches for 94 yards and a touchdown. He was nearly invisible with Derek Carr at quarterback. Then Derek Carr gets injured. Jameis Winston comes in the game, and he starts just looking for Chris Olave multiple times. Their connection was real. They connected on a gorgeous third quarter touchdown, and their touchdown is kind of what got New Orleans back into the game. Now, New Orleans has a bye week this week, but I think it's going to be Jameis Winston when we come back. Derek Carr, the Saints say that he should be ready to play in week 12, but he suffers concussion and also shoulder injuries. So like Derek Carr's banged up. Jameis Winston could get a start. Any way you cut it, like, this is going to be a self-scouting situation where we saw this with CeeDee Lamb and the Dallas Cowboys, where You go into a bye week and you say, I've got to get my playmakers more involved. And I think you're going to see a lot more Chris Olave for the rest of the season. I do have faith that they're going to at least attempt to get this done. You also have Michael Thomas dealing with injuries. So this is going to be Chris Olave, I think finishing the season very strongly after being a very disappointing player for the beginning of the season. Another player we got to talk about, Sundays are better with Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray made his long-awaited return from injury, and he leads Arizona to a 25-22 win. Fantasy managers have to be excited about Murray because he looks like he didn't lose a step. Like the fears that he was going to be like less elusive or less explosive are gone. Like there's a play late in the game where it looked like Atlanta had him wrapped up for a sack, and he completely scrambles around and ends up avoiding the sack and ripping off a beautiful run. Check out my Twitter. I retweeted it, but I was like, shout out to Kyler Murray's surgeon, because this is wild. This is like 11 months after the injury. He looks like he didn't miss a beat. And his connection with Trey McBride is real. Kyler Murray targets Trey McBride, the second-year tight end out of Colorado State, 9 times. They connect 8 times, and McBride finishes with 131 receiving yards. McBride's on an absolute tear. Like, he's a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season, and Kyler Murray is a QB1 for the rest of the season. This Arizona Cardinals team has 2 first-round picks. Ideally, next season, they're going into the year with Kyler Murray as their quarterback. This whole idea that Arizona wants to pivot to Caleb Williams or Drake May, like those guys are very, very good prospects. And we're going to talk about them a ton this offseason. But Arizona, with the draft capital that they have available to them, with Kyler Murray, finishing out the season strongly, and them adding personnel this offseason, like I think that they're going to turn things around really quickly in Arizona. And I think next year they're going to be a very exciting team. And I think this Arizona team is going to be a barking dog for the rest of the season. Lost in the Atlanta shuffle was Bijan Robinson. Managers can finally breathe a big sigh of relief. Robinson had frustrating usage lately. Fantasy managers were very upset with Arthur Smith. I know I was a lot, but there started to be reports this week that Robinson was going to start seeing more normal usage, goal line usage, higher usage in the red zone. And then he did it in significant way. He had a season high 22 carries, had 95 rushing yards and a touchdown. Atlanta has problems on offense, but Bijan is not one of them. His volume needs to be like this the rest of the season. I think that Atlanta, we're talking about Bijan Robinson here. This guy needs 20 touches every single game for the rest of the season. And on a week where, we had some disappointing performances, we talked about Jacksonville and teams like that. The Chargers and Lions just gave us like a fantasy show. The Lions eked out a thrilling 41-38 win. So many impactful fantasy performances for both teams. Keenan Allen had one of the best games of his career, 11 catches, 175 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. The whole idea that Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, and T. Higgins went right before Keenan Allen in drafts, right now is just laughable. Keenan Allen has lapped those dudes. Keenan Allen is balling. What a season for him. Justin Herbert has a season high 4 passing touchdowns. Austin Eckler finds the end zone, finishes with 115 combined yards. Very positive game for Eckler, big time game for Herbert. And we love those numbers for the Chargers. Even Quentin Johnston gets a touchdown. I mean, come on. And then we look at the Lions and we're like, whoa, this is even better. Jahmyr Gibbs is red hot, finishes with 77 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, and he adds 3 catches for 35 yards. And then, not to be outdone, David Montgomery, who played less snaps, which is very, very noticeable for Montgomery in his first game back, plays less snaps than Gibbs. Gibbs outsnaps him, but Montgomery still gets 116 rushing yards. Montgomery ripped off a 75-yard rushing touchdown. Like Pittsburgh, but like Pittsburgh on steroids. Gibbs and Montgomery are both starters for you in your fantasy lineup. And unlike Pittsburgh, if I happen to have Gibbs and Montgomery on my roster, which I'm not sure why you would, but if I had both of them on my roster, I would just start them both. And I would take the entire running back points for Detroit. which is like a very odd way of playing fantasy and redraft to have two players in the same backfield in your starting lineup. But this is a good enough offense that I would just do it. I would do it every single week and I'd be happy about it. And then we got to talk about the Sun God. Sun God goes nuts. He has a season high 156 receiving yards and a touchdown. And Sun God gets 156 and a touchdown. And again, he's not even the leading receiver in this game. I wish that the Lions and Chargers played every single week. Jared Goff also gets you 333 passing yards. What a game. These kind of games we live for as fantasy managers. And then we got to end the week here, guys. CeeDee Lamb. It's CeeDee Lamb season. You know, we talked about on this 2-minute drill, Tyreek Hill being the league winner, A.J. Brown being the league winner. CeeDee Lamb is looking like the league winner right now. With all due respect to Amon-Ra St. Brown and even Keenan Allen, like what CeeDee Lamb is doing is wild. CeeDee Lamb finishes with 11 catches for 151 yards and a touchdown, and he added a rushing touchdown. So CeeDee Lamb is now the first NFL player ever to finish with at least 10 catches and 150 receiving yards in 3 consecutive games. Ever. And Dallas has done this post-bye week. So like we talk about with Olave, we have to give a hat tip to the Dallas organization because during the bye week, Dallas looked at their team and said, this is a CeeDee Lamb offense. That's it. We're going to make our offense built around CeeDee Lamb, and they're rolling with it. They lose to Philadelphia. It was a great game, but they win the other 2 games, and CeeDee Lamb in those 3 games has been targeted 44 times, and he's also getting those rushing attempts. In that stretch of time, he now has, in 3 games, 500 receiving yards and 4 touchdown catches. Wild. CeeDee Lamb, if you have him, hat tip. It was probably a little frustrating at times early in the season where you weren't getting the smash weeks. But if you have CeeDee Lamb in your lineup, more likely than not, you've won 3 games in a row. And CeeDee Lamb, I don't know if I would rather have another receiver in the entire NFL right now for fantasy football rest of the season. And that includes Hill. That includes A.J. Brown. That includes Justin Jefferson when he comes back. CeeDee Lamb makes a statement saying, I'm the best receiver in football. I mean, he's kind of showing it right now. He wouldn't be my pick to be the first wide receiver off the board next season when we draft in fantasy. I'm probably still going to go back to the Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill well. But CeeDee Lamb's making a big push to be included with those guys, and A.J. Brown. I mean, next year in redraft, this is going to be something we're going to start talking about as the season winds down. But next year, you're going to see like 8 wide receivers go in the first round of non-superflex leagues. Like, this is such a great time for wide receiver talent in the NFL and for us as fantasy managers. And we got to talk about Dak Prescott because Prescott, like the CeeDee Lamb gets the story, but Prescott was phenomenal. He finishes with 404 passing yards and 4 touchdown passes. They shredded a hapless Giants team. I think it's time to start talking about firing Brian Daboll. And I know there's people out there that would hate that statement because Daboll was so good with Buffalo and took the Giants to the playoffs in his first year under as the head coach last year. But this is terrible. Like, I live on Long Island, and Giants fans are just like depressed. And there's something to be said, like when you're down to your 3rd string quarterback, people give you the benefit of the doubt, and it's like, you know, it's DeVito behind center. They lose Tyrod Taylor. They lose Daniel Jones. But even like with these guys, you want to see a little bit more than this. This was just not like, if you're a Giants fan, this was a depressing one to watch. But Dak Prescott, QB1 overall this week, pending Monday Night Football. Josh Allen, I don't think is going to go ham enough to take away this QB1 overall performance for Dak. So Dak is red hot. Dak is probably a top 6 quarterback for the rest of the season based on the way that we've seen this Dallas offense kind of evolve. As frustrating as it is to be a Tony Pollard manager right now, to be a Dak Prescott manager, a CeeDee Lamb manager, and for that matter, a Jake Ferguson, Brandon Cooks manager, like Dallas passing game is happening. Dallas is scoring points. You got to be excited about them. Again, I am Theo Gremminger. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and check out my other videos. Tomorrow I'm dropping the waiver wire video. I also have my shows this week. Press coverage with Jacob Sanderson Billy Muzio and I at First Class Fantasy are going to be joined by Jeff Erickson. And then Heath Cummings of CBS is joining me for Dynasty Life, my Dynasty podcast on Friday. If you like this video, again, I dropped the waiver wire video. And then I also drop a sleepers video that comes out usually Thursday or Friday. And we ran pure last week. The sleepers video, you can look at it as a video where if you want to get a preview of next week's waiver wire, I had Ty Chandler last week in my sleepers video. I had Noah Brown in my sleepers video. You're going to be adding him this week on the waiver wire. So you might as well get ahead of your league mates and watch that video. And then all of my videos here that are not shows are also articles on playerprofiler.com. Check out the 2-minute drill. It just dropped today on Monday. Check out my waiver wire column, which is dropping tomorrow on Tuesday. And then check out my sleepers article, which is going to drop at the end of the week, usually on Thursday or Friday. Stick with us here, Player Profiler. We got you covered for the rest of the season. We want to see you win titles. We want to see you win some money. Let's go. Let's get some wins. It's week 11. No more messing around. Thanksgiving is right around the corner. Fantasy playoffs as well. Have a great week.